Fair enough. Do we have the ventilation clip?
Yeah.
So
this was wild when Paul played it on.
I was wondering if this is the one. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Philadelphia School District is installing window ventilation fans in school buildings as part of their COVID safety plan. The district released this video today. Students will begin to return to in-person learning on February 22nd. Now, some parents and teachers have complained about this ventilation strategy, arguing it is insufficient.
To say the least.
Arguing.
Don't even have
right.
I mean, they cracked a window, so I mean, like,
right.
I don't know what else more you want from them.
Yeah,
the air moves around, and then the corona.
Right. He's got to blow the COVID
end
around.
Up anywhere.
Right. What's amazing is that, I mean, I would show that, or I think I put it on Facebook, and people that are not in the school district of Philadelphia or don't know what's going on were like, "That's a meme, right?" Like I posted a picture. I'm like, "There's no way that's a real thing." And this was their third time attempting to send us back to in person. So we were thinking, surely this time around they would have like a really fleshed out plan that we cannot poke any holes in. I mean,
their plan was literally they're going to crack a window. And say
right. So yeah.
Well, isn't it The Wire or something that when that one detective becomes a school teacher in Baltimore, they say, listen, like make sure the windows are closed, the students get tired, and therefore you can teach.
Oh, right.
So maybe cracking a window is a special occasion in a city school.
Right. The problem is like the CDC put out guidelines, and then our city also put out guidelines. And had our buildings not been 100 to 200 years old in Chicago, maybe they would work. But like when the rubber hit the road, like our windows don't stay open in a lot of schools, and we're not given like dowels or anything to hold them open. So sometimes you prop them open with like textbooks from the 1970s. I'm not kidding. We've done that before. And then, we are in this period in Chicago right now where like today we had a blizzard. The weekend, it was like the spring, it was 60 degrees. So like sometimes those windows are frozen shut, and other days, you can open them. Sometimes they're raining right in. Like they didn't assess the actual like conditions on the ground before they issued these reports.
Right. And I think a lot of people just don't understand that, I mean, I don't want to speak for Kenzo, but I don't think any teacher is going to sit here and claim virtual learning is as good as in person. So, and we want to go back as well, but people don't realize, they don't understand the magnitude of the conditions that have been deteriorating after decades of austerity, if they're not kind of living in those areas.
No, I mean, look, clearly nobody's going to make that claim. I mean, I teach college students who are, adults who are there of their own free will, and virtual learning isn't right. like the same as being in a classroom. I can just imagine, the K-12 versions. But this is also like, one, you really do have to ask how well people learn if they're rationally worried about getting the plague. And two, I mean, there are competing priorities here, to put it mildly. And this is such like a weird like insult to everybody's intelligence. It's like, well, you have the window. What do you want? There's a window. It's, it's clearly that takes care of it. I remember actually Kenzo seeing the CTU, the Chicago Teachers Union Twitter account, posted a little while ago a picture about how the district was saying, it's okay, just open a window so there's some ventilation, it'll be fine. And you could see that literally the window was snowed shut at that point, so that's obviously pretty extreme, but it also seems like if they're suggesting stuff like this, like if they think that they can get away with that as the entire response, then they're not very worried right now about being able to force teachers back to the classroom.
Yeah, and I think, I don't actually have a national lay of the land, but I'm just imagining there's probably many places without unions that are as strong that have been forced back. Imagine how many places have been. I feel pretty fortunate in my union. I mean, I'll admit it is not as strong as CTU in many ways, but we were at least able to stop like some of the worst of this. but I imagine in many places they haven't been able to.
One place that I thought was really interesting was Cicero, which is a western suburb, not a wealthy one either, pretty working class area. And their union, they basically like copied the campaign that CTU is doing to stay distance. The big difference, though, is that they have an elected school board. So, like, if you're a teacher, if you're a parent, you go grocery shopping at the same grocery stores that the people on your school board do. You can pressure them and you can say, like, hey, I'm not going to make your life easy if, like, you do something I don't like. And so the difference in just the power dynamic than Chicago, they were actually able to win, and they're continuing to do distance learning. In fact, that went to court for them, and the judge determined that the judge would not issue an injunction because what they were doing was not a job action, because they were still insisting upon teaching just via distance. So it's just interesting how, like, you leave Chicago, which has a completely different set of education policies, and like the same kind of campaign can be more effective.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that because you sent me that article that you like the interview that they did with you at one point, where you're talking about I guess the school board, or the lack of a school board in Chicago, because the mayor's office was given pretty much the ability to like elect put it like place in their own CEO who basically just answers to, in this case, Lori Lightfoot. And I was wondering if you could break that down, kind of like how that came to pass, and I guess under which mayor, and how it's caused problems for teachers unions.
So this is such an interesting history, because if you ever want to look at how Democrats and Republicans have worked together to gut the private sector or the public sector, this is it. In 95, this was right at the heels of the big Republican takeover of national politics, the contract with America, Newt Gingrich, and all that. That also impacted state legislatures. So for the first time in a long time, Chicago had a Republican state legislature. And they also had a new mayor in Daley Jr., who took over after Harold Washington, who was a populist, grassroots organized campaign. And then the neoliberal reaction to that was Mayor Daley Jr. winning. And he had a very close relationship with Republicans in the state, because they all had very similar goals. Mayor Daley Jr. being a neoliberal, he was part of these civic associations, so like the business community shaping policy locally. So he rubbed shoulders with Republicans just as much as he did Democrats. And he was able to convince them in 95 to give him total control of the schools. So he got to appoint the entire school board, meaning we don't have a school board. The mayor of Chicago pulls the levers on the decisions they make. And it also, in the same year, they were able to gut our bargaining rights specifically just in Chicago, where we can only strike, or we can only strike over wages and benefits. So what that does is it makes it hard for us to like go on strike for class sizes, which is something the public would always support us on. And, it was very intentional to make us look very greedy over the years every time we tried to fight for more.
And the head of the school board that he appoints is literally, I think, in what I was reading, called the CEO, right? Like, yes,
and that's important.
As if it's a corporation.
Part of that is, branding and everything. But what that meant was a superintendent has to have a state license to be a superintendent. The CEO does not. So they changed the law specifically to appoint this guy, Paul Vallis, they've sent him all around Connecticut, all around the country to privatize shit. I think he was in Philly for a while, right, Paul?
Yeah, I think with the School Reform Commission, which was our state takeover of our school board, which we did get rid of recently, but it's mayoral appointed still.
So yeah, Paul Vallis, and then Arnie Duncan, who was, the neoliberal beast, who was able to force a bunch of education reform, corporate reforms down people's throats with this Race to the Top initiative, which was kind of an overreach of the federal government under Obama. And, all of these things are connected. Obama and Duncan going to the White House from Chicago, where they made their bones with people like David Axelrod.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, don't really have a sense of how hostile the Obama administration was to teachers unions.
And so, like, that led to pretty much every problem we've had in Chicago, every strike we've had. in the past 10 years is the fact that our school board is not accountable to anyone but the mayor, and we have a fucked up electoral system here. So the mayor isn't necessarily someone who has the will of the people, but has all the power and authority.
And then skip ahead, I guess, to Lori Lightfoot, who's like kind of one of the first people that doesn't come out of that political machine. Like even Rahm Emanuel obviously like has the connections to Obama and the Daley family. So just the fact that her CEO is going to be different than the Daley family CEO, but it still is the same goal, I think, is what you were kind of trying to say.
Yeah, and the interesting thing so we've been complaining for years. I mean, we want to have an elected school board to make the choice of who the super should be. But part of what our messaging was, which may have been a mistake, was that we want an educator at the board. Well, we got one, but it's, a member of the professional managerial class, Janice Jackson, who is not there supporting teachers and not there advocating for us. She, you would think it would be great to have a classroom teacher at the helm saying like, oh, and when I was in the classroom, X, Y, and Z things were problems. She was very resistant to any common sense reform we had at the bargaining table a year and a half ago, too. It was like negotiating with someone who was not even a teacher or never had that experience. So, we have an educator at the helm, but she's not a popularly elected or supported one. So she has, carte blanche to make all sorts of awful decisions on behalf of the mayor.
Mm-hmm. And the amazing quote from the interview with Lightfoot in the New York Times, where she's like, I mean, what's wrong with these teachers? It's like they want to run the school district.
Actually, I have
they want to run the city. They want political influence. What's wrong with that? Yeah. Right.
She said, let me put it in context of labor across the city. We have relationships with 40 organized labor unions. She goes she does that. And then she goes, they ask, what do you think their motivations are? She goes, I'm not going to speculate about what their motivations are, but I don't believe that's correct. I mean, if you look at their spending, there's a real clear indication of what their larger ambitions are. And then she says, ultimately, they'd like to take over not only Chicago public schools, but take over running the city government. That'll play itself out over time. I don't really spend time, and certainly not in the middle of a pandemic, worrying about the politics. But politics intrudes always.
I love this. First of all, I love when politicians try to be like, I don't do politics.
Yeah.
I know I'm the elected mayor of a major U.S. city, but like, I don't understand why politics is involved with what I do.
Yeah, well, we were just talking about that with Cuomo. Cuomo going like, playing politics is the big problem with everybody coming out against his sexual harassment allegation.
But yeah, Lightfoot, I mean, it's just like, what are these peasants thinking that they can influence politics,
Anything bad is politics. Anything good is their, genius. Yeah,
and they have, and also, of course, the thing that jumped out at me about that was the labor piece, right? Mm-hmm. We have labor piece, with all the rest of these, it's just not these damn, teachers. So, which really ties into the politics thing, because it's like both of those are different ways of saying that people won't just shut up and do what they're told.
Right. And also, the attempt, as you see there, it's like, the police union and the firefighters union, they cooperate. But these other public sectors don't. And, Scott Walker actually did a very similar thing when he attacked the public sector unions in Wisconsin back in 2011. He actually was pretty smart about playing off certain unions were the good ones, and he wasn't going to attack the firefighters and some others, but he attacked the others with classic divide and conquer.
The way I could describe Lori Lightfoot's relationship to the Fraternal Order of Police is similar to Barack Obama's relationship with Netanyahu, where like she gives the police everything. She gave them a fat budget. She gave them a bunch of our CARES Act money. She gave us school budget money in the form of school resource officers. And yet they hate her guts, and they talk so much crap about her, and they have their own police blogs where they call her Groot and just like dress her down. And yet she like cannot, she just cannot help them out enough. And they know, like, they don't have to be nice to her, because the meaner they are to her, the more she'll get. And it's a relationship she'll never win. And, the teachers here were, kind of like the Palestinians, I guess.
Well, we were talking yesterday on Meet the Left about, I asked you about her as a police accountability person in the Rahm Emanuel, like her role as that, because, after the Laquan McDonald or that murder happened on the street, she kind of was the person they put in charge of the police accountability hearings, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was, one of those, it's like we talk about how like the PMC, like they aren't there to advocate for the people. They're there to advocate for the bosses or whoever's in power. And that accountability board was, on paper was there for the people to have some sort of say in what in policing. And really it was her being a mouthpiece for the police, telling the public why the police are okay and why, certain things they did were defensible. And like, that should have been enough for us not to elect her.
Yeah. So I want to get back to the school issue. I mean, we kind of heard like a little bit about where things stand in Chicago. So Paul, I mean, like what's the state of this right now in Philadelphia?
Yeah, I mean, so back on, we were slated to return February 8th, and our union, we had a big day of action that day. Oh, well, K-2 teachers were slated to return, and we had a big day of action. And, sometimes the classic quote, "A best organizer is a bad boss." And if there was anything good that came out of it, that day of action was, the most solidarity we've seen in the union in a while. And, many people were participating in their first picket line, their first union action. So we were able to stave off reopening then. They have since, basically they've determined certain buildings are cleared for opening, like they've done ventilation tests and are claiming they're okay. And those schools have to be approved by our union's environmental scientists. So, I mean, some people are, it's not perfect that some are starting to go back. So K-2 schools, a lot of them are opening. Now, and again, it's only for students that have signed up, and many haven't. I mean, that's the other part of this. Many are still choosing not to. And also, some people are not realizing quite what this means with a hybrid plan. Like, students are going to be in a classroom still with a computer. We still can't exchange like papers and stuff. And it's still going to be a very limited education while they're in person. But so K-2 schools are starting to open up. It's unclear at this point whether middle and high school will. Mm-hmm. I mean, at this point, it's getting towards the end of the school year. I mean, at this point, it seems pointless. Right. So it is, I mean, to be honest, it's kind of up in the air in Philly right now whether beyond K-2 will be opened. But the other thing I'll say, it'd be very rational for some people to be like, why are they trying to do this? Why are they pushing us back? And I do think part of it is just a power play, and especially in Philly, gearing up for our contract fight. Our contract expires in August. I kind of see this as like the first round of that fight. And again, if there's anything that's good, I think it is starting to galvanize our members just to get into practice of fighting back. And I think this is going to be a tough contract fight. So that's kind of part of what I think Lightfoot alluded to in that interview, is that this is like a broader political fight. It's not really just about opening schools. It's about being able to force teachers to do what they want us to do.
Because I mean, like it's really hard to claim that it's that, that it's really about education, that it's that important to force people back for like 6 weeks or something at the end of the year.
Right. Yeah. So again, it's unclear, if I had to bet right now, I still would bet that high school would not be going back by the end of the year. But I mean, as you see with the fans thing, like can never underestimate what our district will do. That makes no sense whatsoever. So
are there safeguards for the schools that do go back if numbers like spring back up?
And the union negotiated a MOU, or memorandum of understanding. It's kind of like a temporary special contract that does stipulate about, testing regularly and like what happens if a case breaks out. And again, there are certain schools where like some rooms are deemed unsafe for people to be in because they test the ventilation levels. So again, there are some good protections in place. And like, I can't stress enough, in this process, when this all started a year ago, like even an imperfect union like mine is, my union has not been taken over by a caucus like in Chicago, but even in a perfect union, like how crucial unions are for like basic safety and stability, like to be able to know last school year, like we would be working from home and we had like a few weeks just off of school, like to know that my pay is guaranteed and like there is some check in place. It's just like, I can't express how much difference that just makes in your overall well-being. And just like one more example of how important unions, even imperfect unions, are.
Mm-hmm. For us, I think it really is a testament to how hard the capitalists really wanted to open up the schools. It was bipartisan, as much as, both parties don't really want to admit it. The Republicans wanted it to happen. They couldn't make it happen. And it looks like with Biden in office, his first 100 days, one of his promises was reopening all the schools. Whether or not that was safe doesn't matter. It was just, it was one of his campaign promises. So he's going to follow through with it, and he's going to allow the, Democratic governors and mayors to put the screws to people for it. And so the situation with us was immediately at the beginning of the year, they wanted to open up the schools. And the CTU, at that point, all we had to do was call for a meeting to discuss a vote on whether or not to strike. And then they rescinded, and the board said, okay, we can teach distance. And that went on for quite some time. And then it was just an ongoing anti-CTU, anti-teacher, campaign from there on out. Like, the mayor really wanted to make it clear she felt that our advocacy for distance learning was because we were lazy, which is bullshit. It's like I'm working 12, 14-hour days, re-gearing all my old lessons for distance. Like, it's more work, and I hate it, but I also don't want to get COVID. And so it became just a back and forth, and we almost struck again. Had we not fought so hard and actually organized and prepared for a strike, we wouldn't have gotten anything. And we ended up getting an agreement out of this, which was far from perfect, but without it, we wouldn't have had any safeguards really in place in the classrooms. None of it would have been grievable. Is the big issue, is that now, if something is violated, we actually have some teeth to an agreement. And unfortunately, like, we couldn't get everything for people who have like immunocompromised partners at home or family, but those folks can now take a unpaid leave of absence and, have a job and have their health care. So we didn't get everything we deserved, but it was just because the other side was fighting so hard and, insisting things like before Lori Lightfoot said that to the New York Times, she said at the negotiating table, I think you're just trying to take over city government. Like, it really kind of animated their side in negotiations. The idea of like, how dare you? Like, we're the experts in the room. We're the ones that are going to do this. And we're like, no, we're the ones who are in the classrooms every day. And we understand how none of these things are going to work. And,
Right.
Mandating masks on pre-K students, some with special needs, it's going to be very difficult. So even though, we're slowly folding in now. Right now, it's just pre-K through 8, and citywide clinicians, people like social workers. And after spring break, which is in 2 weeks, they'll talk about high school teachers. I have a feeling just out of spite, the mayor might send high school teachers back within those last 2 months of the school year.
Yeah. Which goes back to Paul's point about how, it seems like more of a show of power than anything else. It's hard to see, what anybody else thinks they're getting out of that, especially under the circumstances. I also wanted Kenzo to go back to something Paul sort of mentioned in passing, and that I think probably a lot of people who are watching this know what he's talking about, but I'm guessing not everybody does. Which is why the CTU is as good a union as it is right now, and what the history is there.
Yeah. So it starts back in like maybe 2008. The Chicago Public Schools was under this program called Renaissance 2010, which started in 2004. And the idea there, it was another one of those great press releases where the Chicago Public Schools was going to open up 100 brand new schools, small schools, which right there is false messaging. Small schools does not mean small class sizes. What this meant was they would close down some schools and then reopen 3 schools within a school. And 2/3 of the new schools they would bring in would be non-union. So it was pretty blatant union busting that the CTU at that time, under our old leadership, they were just not prepared or even really interested in fighting. And so a bunch of teachers got together and we decided that we wanted to stop these school closings, which were so dangerous. Like schools would close that were hubs of the community. Students would have to, for the first time in their lives, cross gang lines to go to their new schools, and kids were getting, beaten and killed. Even there, Darion Albert was a student who got murdered because of these programs, and like I can name a few more. And so this program was getting very little pushback, and so like this kind of militant group of leftist, and not even just leftist, but also just militant teachers in the union came together, and we started having book groups. We read Naomi Klein's Shock Doctrine, and that gave us a good framework for how the school system is built on this neoliberal model. We looked at New Orleans as a case study, and saw Paul Vallis, who was there too, and all that he did, and we saw that it wasn't a conspiracy, it was a plan. And the plan had actors, it had people involved in it. And a lot of these people were controlling our schools. So we became almost like a shadow union. We came up with the name CORE, the Caucus of Rank and File Educators, and slowly just started organizing. Our first big win was we won 2 people to our pension board, which is kind of a lower stakes election than the union office election, but it was one where it was like our trial balloon to see how well we organized, and where we needed to kind of beef up our field operation. And then in 2010, we did not expect to, but we won union leadership, and that was the year that Karen Lewis, rest in peace, became the president of the Chicago Teachers Union, and that it was a big struggle for the first few years. The first couple of years, the media and just influential people in the public wanted to say we were a fluke, we were a freak show that just won by accident. They hurled insults at our leadership, but then we showed that like we were making connections with communities, with the community orgs, with parents, with local school councils, which are like these mini school boards that are actually elected in individual schools. And because of that, we led to a successful strike in 2012, the first strike in 25 years. It was a year into Rahm Emanuel's first term as mayor, pissed him off. That was when he, I think, realized that he always hated us, but at that point he saw us, I think, as a formidable opponent. And it energized the entire city, and other orgs started blossoming from there.
I have a clip of Karen Lewis on Democracy Now.
Yeah, let's do it.
The day the strike ended, pretty much talking about what they achieved with it.
In terms of salary, what did you achieve?
Well, we fought off merit pay, which was something that they were absolutely adamant about. They wanted to take away our lanes, which are for achievement of advanced degrees. They wanted to take away our steps, which are for experience. And it's the way we've been doing things traditionally for some time. They wanted to replace that with some sort of merit pay piece. Or as they call it, differentiated compensation, that were tied to evaluations. And we were adamantly against that, and for a variety of reasons. And that took an awful lot of wrangling. So in terms of that, austerity contract compared to what we had before. But at least we were able to maintain this. And when we argued about it, they said, well, we're giving you your lanes and stops. And I said, but you need to understand, we had never lost them. So that was something in your mind that you are giving. And I think that's problematic. We also got a right to recall in schools that where enrollment drops. If that enrollment comes back up, if they project it incorrectly, then we got the right to recall, which we've never had, by the way. So in many districts, when things like this happen, the right to recall is no big deal, but now we actually have it. So there are small things. We got an anti-bullying measurement, an article. And one of the issues about that is that our members have been so miserable in schools. We've had a lot of problems with principals changing people's programs in order to set them up for failure. It's like I know of a nationally board certified teacher in science who taught 7th and 8th grade science, and she was given a kindergarten class. I mean, this is like an inappropriate, there's no pedagogical reason for this. So these are the kinds of things that were going on in Chicago that were really driving people to easily decide to make a decision to strike. I mean, the problem is he has the wrong idea of what this union is. Now, that may be so for other unions, but we purposely tried to change the culture of union so that the union is about education, is about empowering teachers and paraprofessionals and clinicians. And as a result, the union officers took pay cuts, significant pay cuts, so that we could have an organizing department, so that we could have a research department, so that we didn't do the union the way the old union was done, because those days are over, because then people like Bruce Rauner can separate the union from the teachers. And this is where they're wrong. They're absolutely wrong. And they acted that way the entire time because they didn't understand what we were really doing, which was organizing our members, not about the whole, yes, we have to negotiate for whatever, but that's not our main focus. So our main focus is trying to make education better, because we feel like we can solve some of the problems. The longer school day was a hot, buttery mess until we sat down with them and said, okay, look, you can't afford to pay us this entire length of day because the arbitrator told you that. So here's a way to figure this out by staffing up so that you can save some money. We actually brought that to the board because they were clueless. They were absolutely clueless in trying to figure out the problem. We're teachers. We're problem solvers. And for Bruce Rauner has to remember, I'm 2 years out of the classroom. So for me, not a bureaucratic union hack. Sorry, that tag just won't hang on that.
First of all,
rest in peace.
I know I was going to say, I mean, what a figure Karen Lewis was. Yeah.
She was definitely.
I love that. I love that. We're teachers, we're problem solvers line at the end of it.
Yeah. And that was prescient too. Like Bruce Rauner became our mayor 3 years after this, after she gave that speech. Like she saw where power was and like was able to isolate it. And like I could never have asked for a better political mentor than her.
Yeah, so she was the head of the Chicago Teachers Union until 2014. She passed away last month. Since we live in an unjust universe, Rahm Emanuel is still alive,
right.
but Karen Lewis is dead. Which, yeah,
I was going to say too. I mean, I can't overstate like how important that 2014 or 12. 2012.
First strike was 2012. Yeah.
2012, Chicago's teacher strike was. And like, I mean, just to tell a little story, that strike happened. And probably one of the only things productive coming out of Occupy Philly was we formed this labor working group. At the time, I was in a socialist organization called Solidarity that had a few people who were, intimately involved in Chicago teacher strike as rank and file members. And we, organized for a few Chicago teachers to come to Philly and speak to an audience of Philly teachers and basically say, this is what was going on. This is how we did this. And that was the birth of our caucus of working educators. And I think that is what inspired the UCOR network, the United Caucus of Rank and File Educators. So, I mean, I know Chicago teacher strike is mentioned a lot on the left, and as it should be, like it really just like was a catalyst for so many things. Like I'm not sure you would have the Los Angeles teacher strike of 2019 if you didn't have the CTU strike first.
The cool thing about that too is that in 2009, before we took power, we actually went out to UTLA and met with because they had like a mixed leadership of like some radicals and some old guard folks, and like we sat and they taught us lessons, and then we took those lessons and we won leadership, and then after we had a few years in, like we were giving them lessons back. So
right,
it's just so important to have these kind of networks together because no one's going to teach us how to fight the bosses, really.
Right. And what's really cool is then now you go to the Red for Ed and West Virginia, for example, which I don't think it's 100% accurate to say that strike was spontaneous, but it was more spontaneous than CTU, let's say. And, you know, coming out of that, even though I think you could say that was a success, like they actually didn't really have a structure in place. And now, like those people that led that strike are part of this UCORE network, which is United Caucus of Rank and File Educators, a national network of, you know, teacher caucuses and activists. And now they're kind of learning how to implement this structure to kind of have a more sustainable structure in West Virginia to try and consolidate these gains. So, you know, that network is invaluable.